References Committee in relation to its inquiry into the future of Australia's naval shipbuilding industry. This is a public hearing and a Hansard transcript of the proceedings is being made. This is the committee's third public hearing for this inquiry in the 45th Parliament. Before the committee starts taking evidence, I remind all witnesses that in giving evidence to the committee they are protected by parliamentary privilege. It's unlawful for anyone to threaten or disadvantage a witness on account of evidence given to a committee, and such action may be treated by the Senate as a contempt. It's also a contempt to give false or misleading evidence to a committee. The committee prefers all evidence to be given in public, but under the Senate's resolutions, witnesses have the right to request to be heard in private session. It's important that witnesses give the committee notice if they intend to ask to give evidence in camera. In addition, if the committee has reason to believe that evidence about to be given may reflect adversely on a person, the committee may also direct that the evidence be heard in private session. If a witness objects to answering a question, the witness should state the ground upon which the objection is taken, and the committee will determine whether it will insist on an answer, having regard to the ground which is claimed. If the committee determines to insist on an answer, a witness may request that the answer be given in camera. Such a request may, of course, also be made at any other time. I remind people in the hearing room to ensure that their mobile phones are either turned off or switched to silent. On behalf of the committee, I'd like to thank all those who have made submissions and the representatives here today for their cooperation in this inquiry. And I now welcome Mr. Brent Clark, Interim CEO from DCNS. Now, information on parliamentary privilege and protection of witnesses and evidence has been provided to you. For the Hansard record, could you please state your name and the capacity in which you appear today?
Yes, thank you, Mr Chair. Brent Clark, Interim CEO of DCNS Australia, here to address the Committee on the Naval Shipbuilding Inquiry.
Thank you very much, and I invite you to make a brief opening statement should you wish to do so, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Sure, thanks. What I intend to do, Mr Chair, is I'll read part of this opening statement, then I'll table the rest for the committee to read in due course. So thank you very much for the opportunity to appear before the committee today. When this Committee of Inquiry was formed, industry was awaiting the way forward for the naval shipbuilding in Australia via the government's National Shipbuilding Plan. In DCNS's view, the release of the federal government's long-anticipated National Shipbuilding Plan provides an overarching framework to create a sustainable maritime industry and bolster the Australian economy for generations. For my own part as Chief Executive of DCNS Australia, I can now talk to how this impacts the future submarine program. Of particular importance is the commitment of the Commonwealth to develop a modern submarine construction facility at Osborne North in Adelaide. With the Commonwealth, we are currently working on a costed detailed design for infrastructure to build the submarines, with shipyard construction to begin from next year. In that plan, the Commonwealth also reinforced its commitment to a rolling acquisition program for submarines, which creates certainty, not just for DCNS, but for the many hundreds of Australian suppliers who will be involved in the program in planning for future investment and workforce needs. The establishment of the $25 million Naval Shipbuilding College in Adelaide will also assist DCNS in recruiting talented workers to take on the program. There is a simple message I want to convey to this committee today, and that is that the future submarine program is a national one. Though hull construction and assembly of the future submarine will take place in Adelaide, parts and component suppliers will come from across the country. Australian industry has begun embracing the program, as evidenced by the hundreds of companies that have attended industry briefings held prior to and after the completion of the bid process. Already since being selected, these industry briefings run in concert with the Commonwealth and Combat System Integrator and our partner Lockheed Martin Australia. They've been staged in Adelaide, Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane and Perth, and so far have attracted more than 1,400 attendees from companies, educational and research institutions. Of particular relevance, I feel, there have been some 875 requests for information, which we have sent to 234 firms nationally. This includes 76 firms from Victoria, 71 firms from New South Wales, 37 from WA, 36 from South Australia, and 14 firms from Queensland so far. There will be more briefings to come in Darwin, Hobart, and at the Pacific 2017 Naval Conference in Sydney. In terms of all the systems and parts that go on the submarine, they will come from all over Australia, whether it's Broome, Burnie or Bundaberg. The Future Submarine Program aims to deliver to Australia a regionally superior submarine capability. The future submarine will be constructed in Australia and will be operated and sustained with sovereignty. It is a Commonwealth requirement that all 12 submarines will be built in Adelaide. Additionally, in terms of production of the submarine, the pressure hull, systems and all the ancillary equipment that goes into the submarine, this will all achieve a very high percentage of Australian industrial involvement. The program must ensure that the Australian industrial capability necessary to build the future submarine and support its operations and sustainment is established. This will involve maximising the involvement of Australian industry in all phases of the program without unduly compromising capability, cost or schedule. This is at the forefront of the DCNS decision-making process. What I propose now is to table the rest of this.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
Everyone happy to
Yes.
table that? Yes, thank you
Thanks.
very much. Thank you, Mr.
I felt that the committee would probably be much more interested in asking questions than listening to me read a prepared speech.
Okay, thank you very much. And I might just kick off with one question and I'll hand it over to Senator Carr. You mentioned the 14 Queensland companies that expressed interest in the project. Can you tell us, I know you may not be able to tell us a great deal, but I'm just interested in the nature of that
Yeah,
interest.
of course. I mean, I could actually give you a list of the Queensland companies that are involved. In fact, I can give you a list of all the companies involved nationally. I've got that information. Essentially, up in Queensland, we've got people that manufacture parts, pumps, componentry, electrical equipment, cabling, that sort of thing. We're seeing that all around Australia. So Queensland is a supplier. Queensland companies supply into ASC already, but they also supply into other shipyards around Australia, having come out of Williamstown in Melbourne and Garden Island in Sydney. I've used Queensland suppliers in that front. So, as you would probably expect, the kind of things that you would think that go into a warship, cables, componentry, that sort of thing.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Senator Carr.
Mr Clark, you're new in the job. How are you enjoying it?
I love it.
It's good to hear. The DCNS told us, initially made a public comment that the level of the Australian content for the submarines would be 90%. What is it now?
I might just clarify that comment from the previous CEO. What the previous CEO was talking about at the time was the level of production and assembly activities in Adelaide. He wasn't talking about the overall Australian industry content.
I see.
To move forward to answer that question, what we are doing at the moment with the department is sitting down and going through the submarine system by system and looking at all the components that go into the submarine and trying to make sensible decisions as to how we move forward so that we don't affect the cost, schedule or capability.
I'm surprised you say there's a clarification needed here. Remember the statement was quite clearly it was 90%. You're saying that was just incorrectly interpreted, was it?
No, I'm not saying that at all, Senator. The previous CEO certainly mentioned the figure 90%, but he also said to clarify that 90% figure pertained to the assembly and production activities only, not the overall content of the submarine.
When we discussed this matter on the 4th of April in Adelaide, the figure was presented by, I understand it might have been the Minister actually said that the figure had been reduced to 60%. So what is the figure now?
As I previously answered, Senator, we're working with the Commonwealth, the Department of Defence at this stage. It's a complex program that we're going through and we are taking them through system by system to look at what can be done on the submarine from an Australian industry capability perspective.
So you can't give us a figure?
Not at this stage, no.
Why not?
We haven't done that body of work yet, Senator.
It was clearly the previous CEO could give us a figure, even if you've redefined it, but he could give us a figure. You can't give us a figure at all?
Not at this stage, Senator, no.
When will you be able to give us a figure?
Oh, the aim is to complete that body of work over the next period of time. So we would be looking at being able to refine some sort of figure by the end of the year or the start of next year.
See, thank you. There was also a provision within the original scoping arrangements that there would be extensive union Naval Shipbuilding Plan, the NSP, for instance, 4.57 on page 76 clearly states that provision. What steps have you taken to actually consult and work with the ACTU and the unions on this program?
Yeah, thank you, Senator, for that question. So I've been involved in at least 3 discussions with a variety of trade unions. We have another set of meetings scheduled to take place next week with the ACTU and the Electrical Trade Workers Union and others. We've got a draft MOU that has been submitted to us by a collection of trade unions, which we're currently reviewing. So we've got a reasonably open dialogue, I believe, with the unions.
So you mentioned the ETU. How many other unions?
Oh, well, there's going to be a variety of unions, as you would understand from the worksite. But at the moment, we have specifically sat down with the ACTU, the Electrical Trade Workers Union, the Professional Workers Union, to name 3. But again, it's a slow process and we want to get it right.
I see. Now, the metal workers, they're the main union on site, aren't
Yes, yes.
they? When did you speak with them?
We spoke to Glenn Thompson from the Metal Workers Union twice, and he's also part of the...
When was that? Can I get...
the exact dates?
Yes, please.
I'll have to take that on notice, but I can provide you the exact dates.
Because I understood there were some discussions with your predecessor, but there hasn't been any with you. Is that the case?
Not the case. I've spoken to Glenn on 2 separate occasions since the predecessor left. He submitted to me the draft copy of the MOU, and I've arranged to have a meeting with him and 3 other unions. I believe it's on the 29th of June.
Right. And that's recently, is it?
Yeah, I'll get you the exact date, Senator, but I would say either last week or the week before.
Thank you very much. In regard to the Australian Industry Participation Agreement signed between yourselves and the Defence Materials Technology Centre, can you explain what's involved with that?
Well, we've got a memorandum of understanding and agreement in place to work cooperatively with the DMTC to try and promote and ensure that the Australian level industry and the Australian involvement can be maximised. That's the overarching intent of that agreement.
When will it commence? When will the agreement actually commence?
Oh, the exact date of commencement of that agreement I'll take on notice and get to you. Provide that as a separate answer.
So are there any what's the financial implications in terms of that agreement?
There are some financial... we have a financial implication in terms of in-service support, so we will be funding a graduate into that program to assist. But it's in-kind support that both parties bring.
I see. And exactly how will Australian industry be involved in that process?
Are you talking about the process with the DMTC?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So basically the synopsis of the agreement is for DCNS and the DMTC to work together to bring Australian industry into the view. What we have agreed with the DMTC is that we feel that they're best placed to look for particularly SMEs and smaller Australian industry involvement, so anyone that's part of that process can actually get access to and be part of that process with us.
Mm-hmm. Have you provided a copy to the Department of Defence?
Yes.
And to the Minister's office?
I would have to check. We've certainly given it to the Department of Defence. I don't know whether we gave it to the Minister, but I can take that on notice.
Would you? Presumably there are 2 Ministers' offices, so either of the Ministers' offices received a copy?
I'd have to take that on notice, Senator.
Thank you. And have you briefed the Minister's office?
On the DMTC? No, I have not.
Why not?
Because at this stage, Minister, it's a very early agreement. We're still working out that relationship. So we have advised the Department of Defence on what we're doing in that case, but we didn't think we were in a position to be fully able to brief either Minister at this stage.
Have you provided a copy of the agreement to anyone else?
I certainly have not.
Oh, it's the company. It's the company.
Yeah.
And I presume you're speaking on behalf of the company,
Yes.
are you?
Yeah.
Thank you. In regard to the use of Australian steel, what arrangements have you made for the use of Australian steel?
At the moment, we're conducting a process with both BlueScope and BizAlloy to look at a certification process and review how they do their product manufacture and that sort of thing. We have been engaging quite heavily with them. We've had at least half a dozen meetings with both those companies on this matter. We've had our French steelmaker come across and assist us in that process. And the aim of the outcome of that entire process is to produce a business case for submission to the Department of Defence, and then the Department of Defence will take that to government.
Mm-hmm. In previous evidence before the JSOC committee, in fact, you indicated there was some disappointment in the take-up of Australian companies in the project. Do you stand by that?
No, I would say that after my comments at the previous committee, that Australian industry has stepped up quite strongly, and as you would not be surprised, took some measure of umbrage to my commentary and have really stepped up to the plate.
I see. So there were 86 companies identified, is that right? 86, is that the number of companies that have identified in the pre-qualification process?
Yeah, yes, I can give you that exact figure. So at the moment, we've got, as it currently stands, as of today, 106 companies.
And how many French companies?
None.
None?
None.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And in terms of the Australian Industry Capability Plan, how do you actually see that working in regard to what the Department of Defence has asked you to revise or amend before they're prepared to approve it?
Yeah, look, we've engaged in quite a high level, as you would imagine, a series of workshops with the department to fully understand and appreciate their requirements. In fact, there's a workshop going on as we speak in Adelaide, a 3-day workshop going on as we speak. So the intention is obviously for DCNS and the Commonwealth to work together to come up with a document that the Commonwealth, that the Department of Defence is happy with, and that they're happy to take to government.
I see. So what's the role of the ASC in the project?
ASC? Well, very little at this stage. ASC obviously has, as you will be aware, the government split ASC into 3 companies. ASC Shipbuilding, ASC Collins Sustainment and the Australian National Infrastructure Company. We're working with ASC and they're assisting us with looking at the facilities requirements and upgrades. We're working with ASC with respect to a controlled measure of transfer of personnel from one entity to the next. ASC has obviously done a fair amount of work in terms of a ramp down process for their workforce. We're obviously doing a lot of work with a ramp up process, and we're working together with the 2 companies.
Is it your intention to actually act as the builder rather than just the designer of the vessels?
Yes.
And so will ASC actually be involved as builders?
No.
So what role will they play in the future submarine program?
Well, quite simply, from our perspective, ASC will be consumed by DCNS.
You'll consume them?
Yep.
I see. And is that the basis for your concerns were expressed in the financial review about companies raiding each other's workers?
Yeah, it was, to answer that question, obviously everyone in the committee is aware of the fact that we've got a submarine construction facility that's been built, which will take, a considerable large amount of workers. We've got a ship construction facility that's going to be constructed in Adelaide at Techport, and we've got the offshore patrol vessel. There's going to be quite a large workforce in that area, and it makes good business sense and good logical sense that all entities involved in that process come up with an ability so that we don't end up with having people hopping over the fence to get different pay rises or things like that. We need to work together to make sure that the resources are managed appropriately.
So are you advertising for people at the moment?
Yes, we are.
And what sort of areas?
At the moment, we're looking at some procurement people in particular. That's obviously a very large task for DCNS Australia. We're looking at the first group of Australian design engineers that will be transferred to France in November this year. So there's some 7 design engineers that we're looking for there. We're also looking at program management experts and engineer and technical type people. And plus, we've obviously got a company to set up, so we do need some administrative support and that sort of thing.
You've got senior naval architects, naval architect I see here, platform systems leads. These are the sort of positions that you're...
Yep.
Commercial managers, commercial advisors. Are you talking to ASC about any of those types?
Yeah, I've had a very long relationship with Stuart Wiley, the acting CEO of ASC. One of the commitments that we've given to the Department of Defence is that we will not impact on Collins sustainment in any shape, manner or form. So I've advised Stuart of any jobs that are advertised, and if any applicants come in with a Collins background, we seek their endorsement to proceed with them.
So they can't get the people who apply for work with you, if they worked on Collins, can't get employment without the agreement of ASC?
No. It's not that at all. There are some key resources that ASC has identified for the support of the submarine. If you're a commercial advisor in the Collins program, there's no issues in that person transferring across.
Mm-hmm. So when you say you're going to notify them of people with Collins background?
Yep. It's a gentleman's agreement, Senator, that I have with Stuart, just to make sure that we're not taking anybody out of his organisation that he requires for Collins sustainment.
So what other gentlemen's agreements do you have in regard to subcontracting arrangements with ASC for the building of the submarines?
None.
None. So the only area of gentlemen's agreement covers workers who might want to actually work for you who would have worked for ASC. Is that how it works?
Yeah, I think it's entirely appropriate, Senator, that we don't strip capability out of ASC. We've got a submarine, a Collins-class submarine that needs to be maintained and at sea. Mm-hmm. I don't think there's anything inappropriate with advising Stuart that we may be hiring one of his people.
But no other subcontracting arrangements with ASC?
No, not at this stage, no.
Have there been any discussions with government about the policy implications of that?
Which policy implications, Senator?
Policy implications of not involving the ASC in any subcontracting arrangements for the future submarines project?
No, Senator.
Frankly, I'm a bit surprised that the ASC has no role at all in the building of the future submarines. Is that a formal decision that's been made by government, or is it a decision that the company's made?
There's been no formal decisions made by government at all, Senator.
So it was a decision by your company?
Yes, we've been tasked with designing and building the submarine, Senator, yes.
A revelation.
Well, it's... Has the government indicate when they're intending to move the sustainment of ASC to Western Australia for the sustainment of Collins submarines?
I'm not aware of that, Senator.
You don't think it might have some implications for the ASC that they're not involved in the future submarine project? Some implication for the workforce of the ASC?
Again, Senator, I'm not involved in any discussions with the sustainment of Collins submarines.
No. But I mean, have you conveyed your decision to the ASC? Do they know that you have this view?
Yes, we've had very frank and open discussions with ASC.
What are you paying your architects?
I'd have to take that on notice. I'm not aware of all the wages that we're offering.
Mm-hmm. If you wouldn't mind, you've got these ads here. I'd be interested to know what the salary ranges are.
Sure.
Thank you. I'll leave it there. Thank you very much. You've got...
Senator Xenophon?
Just a couple.
Senator Hume.
A submarine architect or a naval architect, what sort of training does a naval architect require?
Well, naval architecture is like any other sort of architecture type degree, but obviously specifically done from a maritime perspective, so it's a full-blown university course. Mm-hmm. And then, excuse me, then of course, it's like anything, once you've got your degree, then you move into the practical world of actually design and work and apprenticeship. So it's quite a long process.
It must be very sort of specific skills, and there wouldn't be too many of them out there.
No, the world is not full of qualified submarine naval architects.
I can imagine. I'm just surprised that you managed to find, is it 6 or 8?
Seven.
Seven.
Seven's the initial group, but to be very clear, we will be taking that up over the next few years up to something like about 60 to
Right.
form the design authority in Australia. And just to understand the process, Senator, we obviously will bring those people into DCNS Australia. We will then transfer them to France, and they will spend a period of up to 3 years working with the French naval architects to learn the processes and skills. And then they come back to Australia, back to DCNS Australia to be part of the DCNS Australia Design Authority.
And I know Senator Carr's asked some questions about what they were being paid, and of course there was an ABC report that suggested they were being paid $1 million each, but as private contractors by the Department of Defence. Whether that's correct or not, you've taken that on notice, which is fine. But if they get to 40, that sounds like an awful lot to pay 40 people.
We will need up to 60 to maintain the design authority capability in DCNS Australia for the submarine going forward.
Right. But I assume that they would be of various levels, not everyone's...
Oh, of course.
Yes.
Of course. Yes.
All right.
Yes.
That's what I wanted to know. Thank you. The $89 billion, tell me how that is allocated between labour costs, administrative costs. I mean, I know you can't give us the great details, but can you give us a broad brushstroke of how the money is allocated?
The 89 billion...
Well, not the 89, sorry, I should say the submarine contract allocation.
Yeah, so there'll be, and I obviously can't go into too many specifics, but obviously in the number that's going to be allocated for the submarine acquisition and sustainment, there's a component that's acquisition,
Yes.
i.e. buying the product, building the product, and there'll be a component that is the sustainment or the long-term sustainment of the submarines. In that number, there'll also be the price that includes the facilities and infrastructure upgrades and that kind of thing. There's obviously the requirements of the Commonwealth to fund their own project, that sort of thing. So, without trying to break down and give you percentages, because if I start giving you percentages, I'm going to get it wrong.
Yes.
In terms of real numbers. That's the kind of way it'll get broken up.
Okay, so you can't even give me something, I know I said broad brush, but that's very broad.
That is
Can you give me
very
something a little bit more specific than that?
Look, I mean, the simple reality is that that body of work just hasn't been done, and rather than go on the record and give the Senate a false, or this committee a false statement, I'd rather, come back to you when we have a sensible way of doing that.
Fair enough, that's fine. And just as my last question is to follow on from Senator Ketter's issue, which was you were mentioning that you had suppliers from all over the country and you were
Yes.
going to provide us. I'd be very grateful for that from a Victorian's perspective as
Sure.
well. So perhaps, I don't think we officially asked you whether you could
We
take
can-
that on
we-
notice to provide that.
I'll take that on notice.
That would be terrific. Thank you. Thank you.
So can I just follow up? Look, Mr. Clark, I'm sorry if I misunderstood you. I asked you specifically about the question of union consultation, given the importance
Yep,
of this issue and given the importance that you've actually drawn to our attention on this issue.
yep.
And you indicated to us that you've got a meeting next week, right, with the ACTU.
Organised through Glenn Thompson, yeah.
Glenn Thompson.
Yep.
And Mr Thompson, I'm told, wrote to you on the 6th of June. It was the last communication.
Yes, he did, yes.
And he's had no response to that communication. Is that true?
Not that I'm aware of. I asked for a meeting to be put in place, and I've spoken to him on the phone.
Since the 6th of June?
I'd have to check.
You would please, because that's not my information.
Okay, sure.
But a specific communication with you
Yep,
on the 6th of June has not been responded to
okay.
about the level of union engagement around this whole workforce planning issue.
Okay. I can take that on notice.
If you would, please.
That's certainly not the intent. When I spoke to him...
It may well be
Yeah.
there's a misunderstanding
Yeah.
here.
Yep.
Your answer doesn't sit with what I've been told, and I just ask if you could clarify that, please.
I can clarify that. Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely.
Senator Xenophon.
Mr Clark, I'm just a bit disturbed from your, or very disturbed from the answers that you gave to Senator Carr. You've said that DCNS hasn't entered into any agreement with ASC in terms of the future submarine project. Is that right?
No formal agreement, no.
No formal agreement? And what's the nature of the gentleman's agreement that you refer to?
Okay, so what we've put in place with ASC is an agreement in principle. We've got...
Has that been reduced to writing?
yeah, I've got that in writing.
Okay, can you provide a copy of that agreement to us,
Yeah,
please?
yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Okay, and that covers a variety of topics. Manpower aspects is one of it. Facilities and infrastructure is another part of it. Once you see that, I can
Do you
give
have
you
a
that.
copy of that you could provide to the committee today, please?
Yeah, should be able to.
Okay, I'd really appreciate that. So what I'm trying to understand is that it's how many years do you see before you start cutting steel for these submarines, for the future submarines? What time frame are you looking at?
We're talking the mid-2020s.
Okay, so we're 8 years away, say.
Yep.
Or thereabouts.
Yep.
And given ASC has the submarine building capability in this country,
Yep.
you don't envisage a direct role for ASC to be involved in the construction of the future submarines?
No, at this stage, Senator, we would be looking at a transition of the ASC workforce to DCNS. That's
Right,
what
so you'd be absorbing them?
Correct.
Right.
Correct. I'm sorry if I didn't make that clear.
Right.
But yes, that we would be assuming that we would absorb them.
So it wouldn't be ASC that would be the employer, it would be a DCNS that would be the employer?
Yes.
You wouldn't be entering into you're not foreseeing entering into a contractual relationship with ASC?
No, not at this stage, no.
Okay.
No.
So you've had a number of industry workshops in Australia. I think further, Senator Carr, you've said you've had how many pre-qualified companies, Australian companies?
As of June, recently, 106.
Okay, and that's up from, I think, when I asked the question several months ago, it was 50, so it's
Something like
increased.
that, yep.
Which is encouraging. That was out of 1,400 company interactions, is that correct?
From the latest round of industrial engagements, yes.
But okay,
Yep.
okay. Now you've said that there are 100. You've said that there are no French companies that are directly involved at this stage. Is that right?
None that have been pre-qualified for this project, no.
But can I
Sure.
understand this? But there are hundreds of French companies already in the supply chain with DCNS. Is that right?
In France, yes.
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 So presumably, because they're already in the supply chain and doing presumably a good job for you,
Yep.
they'd be in effect pre-qualified, would they not?
No, they're qualified with DCNS France. They're not qualified with DCNS Australia.
Okay, but the fact that they're qualified with DCNS France would tend to, and if you're happy with their performance, presumably you wouldn't be using them unless DCNS France wouldn't be using them unless they were happy with their performance and
Yep.
And the sort of job they were doing.
Yep.
That would tend to give them some inside running in terms of any work here, or any work for the submarine project, future submarine project.
No, Senator Xenophon, I don't think so.
Right.
At the moment, we have done no pre-qualifications of any French company. We've only been concentrating on Australian companies. What DCNS SA does in France and what DCNS Australia does in Australia are different things. We'll obviously have a very similar process because the process that's been used in France is tried and tested, but we're not involving French companies in this process in Australia at this stage.
Okay. But the fact that a company in France has worked well with DCNS may help them if they want to come to Australia or be involved in the future submarine project.
Oh, well, one would say yes, of
Okay.
course, if you're used to working with somebody.
But at this stage, we don't know what the precise percentage both by value and content will be Australian and what will be French. Is that right?
Well, correct, yes.
And do you have any idea when we will know what the precise percentage will be?
The plan, as I said, is to continue to work through with the department to go through system by system to look at all the things on board the submarine.
Okay, but so how many contracts has DCNS already signed up with subcontractors here in Australia today?
As of today, DCNS Australia has signed. Do you want the value with it as well?
Yes, please. That would be very helpful.
As of today, we've signed approximately $11 million worth of contracts with 91 Australian subcontractors.
So that's 11 million out of 91.
No, so $11 million to
$11 million with
91
91.
Australian subcontractors.
Okay.
Yep.
Now, and how much have you signed? How much has been signed up with companies in France by value? You can give me euros if you want for that bit. But
I'd have to take that on notice because the very few companies in France have been part of this program at all.
okay.
It's been
But
DCNS.
in terms of value with DCNS in France,
Yep.
how much of that would have been? What value would be attributed to the work done in France for the project? Because I understand the design is predominantly taking place in France. Is that right at this stage?
At this stage, yes.
Yeah. If you could give us details of that,
Yeah.
you've been very open. I appreciate
Yep,
that.
yep.
In your Australian Industry Capability Plan at paragraph 4.3.1, DCNS states DCNS, in collaboration with the Commonwealth of Australia, will make an assessment of the system and activities that should be performed in Australia. The purpose of this assessment is to illustrate the extent of the AIC, the Australian Industry Content. In turn, this provides an indication of the extent of technology transfer that will be required and indicates where DCNS believes the gaps exist in Australian industry. And then there's something that's redacted, and the plan also states at 1.2.2, saying that the AICP seeks to maximise the involvement of Australian industry without unduly compromising capability, cost, schedule or risk in all phases of the program. I take that on face value that you will collaborate, but nonetheless, from a commercial perspective, I understand that means that DCNS ultimately has the final say based on capability, cost and schedule risks. Is that your understanding?
No, that's not my understanding at all, Senator. That's the Commonwealth always has the final say in these matters.
Well, that's not the case though, because the power seems to reside with DCNS.
No, not at all, Senator. Our role is to provide advice to the Commonwealth, which we do, and the Commonwealth's role is to make decisions.
So, from a contractual point of view, that means that that DCNS is subject to a final ruling or a final determination by the Commonwealth as to what the local industry participation will be.
It may very well be, yes, absolutely.
How it may very well be, or what, because
we haven't got to that level of detail yet, Senator.
Okay, so who has the final say as to what the percentage of Australian industry content will be? The Australian industry participation is something that legally, in terms of being binding, is still a matter for negotiation in terms of between the Commonwealth and DCNS.
Look, I don't think that's the case, Senator. I believe that the Commonwealth ultimately resides or holds that responsibility. So the Commonwealth will there'll be no doubt in my mind that the Commonwealth will be absolutely involved in this process, and if they're not happy with the performance of DCNS and what DCNS is doing, the Commonwealth will ensure that the necessary steps are taken.
I apologise because I've just been reminded that Minister Pyne, in my correspondence with him, and we seem to write to each other all the time nowadays, he has said that the Commonwealth of Australia has final say in respect of, he references clause 1.6 in the statement of work to the conditions of contract, but I presume if the Australian Government insists on a supplier against the advice of DCNS, there will be an additional cost imposed or a schedule alteration or the requirement for a waiver on performance, or all three. Would that be right? Because you've got that important say in terms of capability, cost, schedule or risk in all phases of the program.
Yeah, look, that may be the case, Senator, but may not be the case every time. You're asking questions in the future that I can't fully give you an answer to.
Well, I'm asking you questions based on the documents I have in front of me.
Sure, which are not approved at this stage.
Right, but that could be a hurdle, can it not? I mean, you could say that if the Commonwealth says, no, we want this particular component of the submarines being done here,
sure,
you can say, yeah, we can do it, but it's going to cost you X dollars more, take X months, X months more, and it's going to involve certain risk, for instance.
Absolutely, absolutely, of course it would.
So I presume that you will get to the end of the design phase and will offer the government a submarine. Is that at a fixed build cost for 12 submarines or a fixed sustainment cost? Okay,
so Senator, that's probably an area of the contract that I'm not comfortable to talk about at this stage.
Right, because it's commercially sensitive?
Yeah, we're still in negotiations with the Commonwealth.
Okay. But at that point, you will have a list of Australian components and will be in a position to indicate local content build content, I presume?
Yes.
How far away are we from that stage?
Not as I said a couple of times, we're trying to work through our process with the department now in terms of looking at the submarine system by system, and we're going to try and do that work as quickly, as feasibly as we can. But Senator, it's important we don't rush or make poor decisions.
I'm not asking you to rush anything, but I'm just asking you to indicate, are we talking about 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months? How far away are we?
Look, I would say it'll be more in the vicinity of 12 months.
Okay, so it's clearly not a binary process. You must be building up an idea as you go along.
Sure.
With significant industry consultation. You must have some idea now as to the level of Australian content, don't you? Or at least a ballpark figure, a percentage range.
Yeah, look, Senator, clearly the Australian industry has the capability to do a significant amount of work on this submarine, and we have no doubt about that. We've obviously seen the figures that have been done with respect to the Air Warfare Destroyer, the LHD, previous Collins, and what they've got to in terms of Collins sustainment. So there's absolutely no reason why we wouldn't be achieving those kind of figures. But it would be wrong of me to talk about something that we haven't fully done the work for. I'm happy, once we've done the work, to sit in front of you and answer your question. I just haven't done the work now.
But didn't you tell, was it, who told the treaty, was it, who, did you go to the treaty committee, to DCNS?
Mm-hmm. I did.
Didn't you mention a figure of 90%?
No, I never mentioned a figure of 90%, Senator.
Just trying, did your predecessor mention a figure of 90%?
We had this conversation. I don't know what it was actually for. So clarification's been sought on this matter.
So what I said to Senator Carr's question previously, Senator Xenophon, was that my predecessor had made a comment and he used the figure of 90%. But what he was actually talking about, is my understanding, what he was talking about was the production and construction and the outfitting of, and therefore the workforce percentage in the ship build in Adelaide.
Okay, but can you tell this committee a range of percentages in terms of, and I'm sure Senator Carr may want to chip in on this, the range of percentages both in terms of the value of the build in Australia,
Yep.
and break that down to South Australia and the other states, the value, the content, the degree of Australian industry participation in terms of the project, in other words, the number of hours of work involved here and in France, whether there's a comparator between the two and how many hours would take place,
Yep.
for instance, in South Australia compared to other states. I understand it's a national project. And in terms of, I'm just trying to get an idea of what the percentage would be, because at this stage it could be any percentage, can it not, in terms of local build, local value, number of hours, and of course there's the issue of technology transfer and the value of that, which I understand. You have the intellectual property now resides with DCNS in France, is that right?
Yeah, well, the background intellectual property obviously resides with the company in France. The foreground IP obviously will reside with the Commonwealth, and there's an arrangement in place to transfer that IP. To answer your question, I mean, you quite articulately asked a very good question there, Senator. It's a complex question to answer, and at this stage we have not done the work to answer that question, I think, to the satisfaction of this committee.
What troubles us is that your predecessor could give us a figure of 90%, which you're sought to redefine, but it's still a figure of 90%. You can't give us a figure at all.
I can only explain to you, Senator, what we are doing since my predecessor left.
Is that the reason he left? Is it because his figure was too precise?
No, Senator, my predecessor left because he decided that he wanted to go off and do other things.
Yeah, he wasn't forced out.
No, not at all. Not at all.
No. It's good. I mean, I thought he was very good at the job. He was actually communicating quite effectively, but obviously too effectively.
Senator, I'll leave that. I'm not sure whether that's a question. All I can answer is that what my predecessor said about 90% referred to the production and build in Adelaide, not an overall industry
All right.
content.
Well, let's take your definition of production and build. You can't give us an equivalent figure of production and build of any description.
I don't want to give this committee a figure that I have no basis of fact on at this stage. We are working through that process
Where did
now.
your predecessor come up with a figure of 90%? How did he get that figure?
Senator, I can't answer that question. You'd have to ask him.
That's why I come back to the point. Did you get rid of him because he put that proposition in the public arena?
Not at all. Not at all.
So sorry, through your chair, does the undertaking of the previous CEO pass with his retirement with the company, that is the undertaking of 90%? Is that, does the company, through your chair, is that 90% undertaking, in the way it was put by the former CEO, still a commitment that you make, that you restate on behalf of DCNS?
Senator, until such time as we've done all the work that's necessary, I can't give you a percentage.
Yes, but your predecessor gave a percentage.
Sure.
And do you stick by your predecessor's percentage?
Again, Senator, the only way I can answer that question is until we have done the work and completed the work to the satisfaction of the Commonwealth, I can't give you a percentage.
So the answer is no?
Yes, the answer is no.
Yes, the answer is no. Okay. So tell me, this 90% figure that that your predecessor mentioned, was that an input to the cabinet decision made in respect of this?
Not that I'm aware of, no. No, he mentioned that well after the...
No, but are you aware that that figure 90% was... Are you aware of any figure that was given to cabinet prior to the decision being made for DCNS to win the contract?
I'm not aware of any figure, although I would say I think with some certainty that 90% figure was not involved in that process at all. It was said well after the submission.
So finally, can you provide a figure within a ballpark of percentage local content by value, a percentage of the hours of work to be done here or overseas,
Sure.
and or overseas? Can you provide us with a ballpark figure? Surely there must be some figure. Is it 90% here in Australia, 80%, 70, 60, 50, 40, 30%? How much is it?
Senator, I can only answer the question the same way. Once we have done the necessary work and we have facts to present, I'm more than happy to present those facts to you.
You can't even say it's going to be at least 50%?
Because it would be misleading for me to do that, Senator, because I can't tell you the answer.
You can't even give us a benchmark figure?
I do not believe that I can give you a figure until we have done the work that's required.
But even a minimum figure of Australian content.
I think it's a very dangerous thing for me to do because I would be guessing that percentage right now.
But we can have that caveat, but is there an aim point? What is the project aiming for in terms of Australian content and Australian value in this project?
Look, I think where we're at this stage, as I said, and I acknowledge what you've just said there, Senator. Certainly, now I know my words of maximising Australian industry content are not going to mean terribly much to you, but from our perspective, we would imagine that at least an aim point of greater than 60% would be something we'd be aiming for. But we expect to achieve much better than that, Senator. But it still gets down to the simple fact that we have not done the body of work, we have not worked with the Commonwealth and the Department of Defence to determine everything that's required. And it's not an unreasonable thing for us to take our time to do this properly, because I think that's what the Australian taxpayer and what the government and what this committee should be really demanding of us. And from our perspective, once we've done that work, I will happily tell you what percentage it is, and I'll defend it, and I'll give you I'll give you the number of hours, I'll give you the Australian spend and things like that. But we have not done that work yet.
Okay, but what I don't understand is that presumably the reason why DCNS won this bid was for a whole range of factors, including, obviously a superior bid, but as part of that bid, there would have been undertakings given in terms of the level, the percentage of Australian industry involvement and content.
Correct, absolutely.
So
absolutely.
What was that percentage?
Senator, again, during the CEP process, you've got to understand that during the CEP process, we were not able to do the robust analysis of Australian industry, which is what we're doing now.
You weren't asked to do that during the CEP?
We spent our time looking at the capability within Australia, okay? But right now, the CEP process was quite a short process when you think about it in terms of doing an analysis of Australian industry capability. Since our announcement, we have spent a considerable amount of time travelling around Australia and looking at Australian industry, looking at the capabilities and understanding what exists. That's what we're doing.
So, Mr Clark, has the Commonwealth suggested to you a minimum figure that the Commonwealth would regard as satisfactory?
Not at this stage, Senator. Again, I'm not going to put words into the Commonwealth because that would be unfair, and I understand they're going to appear after myself. But again, what I will say to you is that once we have completed the analysis, working with the Department of Defence, we will then be able to determine the figure to give you.
Can I just say, this is this is obviously the biggest procurement in the nation's history. I've got to say, I know you're relatively, how long have you been in the job for now?
About 4 months.
Okay. Can I compliment you on the fact that you have been as open as you can be, but I'm still disturbed that there at the lack of precision, and this is something that precedes your taking on the role, I presume that there would have been figures given to the Commonwealth in the CEP process about the level of Australian industry participation, and the fact that that cannot be answered today disturbs me. It's not a reflection on you, it's a reflection on the information that you have, and I'm disturbed by that.
I understand what you're saying, Senator Xenophon, and I accept that.
Okay.
I presume your company will keep some records from the time of your predecessors holding a position?
Yes, I would assume so.
Yes. So would you be able to provide the committee on notice the basis on which he made the assertion of the 90% figure? And did he provide that figure? This is a second question. And was that provided in any Australian industry participation plan documentation?
I can certainly take both those on notice, yes.
And I'm advised, Mr Clark, that that DCNS were required to provide an AIC plan as part of the CEP. That's something that the Australian National Audit Office, the Auditor General's Office, mentioned.
Absolutely.
So there must be some percentage somewhere.
Yes, we absolutely provided a...
But you're not going to tell us what it is?
No.
Why not?
Because the plans that were done during the CEP obviously involved a lot of assumptions, etc., right? So what we have since been doing since the announcement has been working with the Commonwealth, looking at how we can go around Australia and develop the Australian industry capability. That's the driving thing here, is to determine the capability within Australia.
But you've already provided a figure to the Commonwealth as to what you expected at the time. It's a point-in-time figure. Now,
Sure.
I think it's a reasonable proposition for you to say, well, look, we've had a look at the capability and it's not there, or it's improved. But you have provided a figure. We'd like to know what that figure is.
Yes. Unfortunately, Senator, I'm not in a position to be able to provide that at this stage.
Well, I actually asked that question of Defence, and they've advised, and I've been advised that they are consulting DCNS on DCNS's views about releasing it. Will you allow Defence to release it?
Senator, I'll have to...
You have to ask the Defence.
No, I don't have to ask
Defence
Defence at all. At this stage...
This is a tortuous FI process I'm going
Correct.
through at the moment.
Okay.
It'll go on for quite some time.
It'll go on for quite some time, I imagine, yeah.
So why can't you release it?
Senator, I can only say again, I believe that the process that we're following at the moment will provide a robust and defensible and justifiable percentage for the committee.
Yes. And was the AEC's involvement as part of the CEP process as well?
In
The
what way?
ASC's involvement, did you ever indicate to the Commonwealth as part of the bidding process the ASC would not be involved in this project?
Senator, we gave a variety of options to the Commonwealth in terms of how we might construct and build and commercial arrangements that were in place.
And exclusion of the ASC was one of those options, was it?
As I said, there was a variety of options.
Was that one of the options?
That was one of the options, yes.
So the Commonwealth's known for some time that that's your view?
Well, as I said, there was a variety of options. I'm not sure whether I could say the Commonwealth's known for it.
Presumably they would know for some... When was that submitted to the government?
When was it submitted to the government?
You're talking about the CEP?
Yeah.
That was submitted, the final CEP was delivered on November 2015, from memory.
But how can it be... You're saying it's commercial in confidence, correct?
Yes.
How on earth can it be commercial in confidence? Because you've actually won, and there's not going to be another CEP for future submarines for another 50 years. I mean, Senator Carr may still be in the Senate then, but he'll be asking you questions
All
about...
my enemies think so.
But how can it be commercial in confidence? You've won. And there won't be another one like this for 50 years, and who knows what sort of submarines we'll have in 50 years' time.
Sure, absolutely true, Senator Xenophon. However...
About Senator Carr being in the Senate, or about the...
well, maybe, I don't know. But from my perspective, there's information in there that we believe could advantage our competitors in an international marketplace.
That's a bit thin. Come on, that's a bit thin.
It may be a bit thin to you, Senator, but that's what we believe.
Well, how? What, does another country want to buy submarines with the specific capabilities that Australia needs?
No, but it goes to the heart of how the company makes its decisions.
Right, well, you finish on that?
Well, the CEP is country specific.
Yeah,
Sure.
it's just,
We'll
we'll
just
have,
ask a couple of follow-on questions from that. At the time that the 90% figure was given by your predecessor, did the company envisage more active engagement by ASC in the construction?
Well, it's difficult for me to answer exactly the thought process my predecessor had. So, but my belief would be no.
You are now the CEO,
Correct?
on an interim basis, but
Correct.
you have access to information and records of the company which would have supported that proposition that led to the 90%.
Yeah, and
Statement.
I believe I've taken on notice for Senator Carr to have a look at. I cannot guarantee that my predecessor had that as a written record or not.
Well, my question then is, as I've said, and can you take that on notice
Yeah,
as
sure.
well?
Yep.
And secondly, I'm going to get up the same dry gully, but you mentioned that the 90% figure related to only the production and build component
Correct.
of the overall
Yep.
project. And based on your experience, what normally does that production and build component represent of the total project in terms of cost or the work involved in it?
Yeah, Senator, look, I will take that on notice.
I'm interested in your considerable
No,
experience in
yep.
this.
And I'll get you an exact. I'll come back to you with an exact percentage.
I'd like you to give me an exact figure, but I'm also interested in your industry experience
Yep.
and I would be interested in you telling me in rough terms, what that production and build
Sure.
component is in
Sure.
respect of the total project.
Yep. And I'm very happy to answer that, but I'd rather give you a specific, correct answer.
can I just follow through this? I've indicated to you before I'm concerned about the question of consultation with the unions in regard to
Yep.
the company. And I understand you're a busy person, but you did indicate it's a series of answers, and I've got further information concerning the email.
Yep.
I just draw to your attention that the first email sent, I mentioned the 6th of June, was actually sent on the 5th, but there was a further follow-up email on the 14th.
Yes, that sounds right. Yep.
That hasn't been responded to either.
No, I thought I had responded to that, Senator.
Well, that's not what I'm told.
Okay.
Not even an acknowledgement.
Okay. Well, as I said, my understanding was that we were organising a meeting for the 29th.
Well, I'm indicating to you the
Yep.
advice that you provided the committee seems to be at cross purpose with the advice. So,
Yep.
as I say, and the significance of this is that what you've indicated at 4.57 in regard to the Naval Shipbuilding Plan, I'll read it out
Yep.
so we're aware of it. Real and sustained workforce change is best realised by cooperative and open change management processes, which involves consultation and cooperation with all parties, including managers, employees and employee representatives such as unions, advocates and associations, consulting with workers on the workplace issues that may impact their welfare and productivity is a matter of best practice. This consultation can identify opportunities, assist decision-making and help ensure that new ideas or changes in policy and procedures may work effectively in practice.
Yep.
But if you can't get an email responded to, it sort of suggests that that may not have much substance.
Well, Senator, I'd support what you just read out, and if there's been an issue with that response to the email, that will be my fault. It could be my end, it could be a technology issue. But as I said to you earlier, it was my understanding that we're having a meeting with a variety of unions on the 29th.
Fair enough. Thank you very much, Mr.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Clark. And, I now welcome representatives from the Department of Defence. And in relation to return of responses to questions taken on notice, 14th of July. The committee is setting the date of the 14th of July for responses. Information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses and evidence has been provided to you. I remind senators that the Senate has resolved that an officer of a department of the Commonwealth or of a state shall not be asked to give opinions on matters of policy and shall be given reasonable opportunity to refer questions asked of the officer to superior officers or to a minister. This resolution prohibits only questions asking for opinions on matters of policy and does not preclude questions asking for explanations of policies or factual questions about when and how policies were adopted. For the Hansard record, could you please state your name and the capacity in which you appear today?
Kim Gillis, Deputy Secretary, Capability Acquisition and Sustainment Group, Department of Defence.
Rebecca Skinner, Deputy Secretary, Strategic Policy and Intelligence.
Mark Ablong, First Assistant Secretary, Naval Shipbuilding Task Force.
The committee has a submission from the Department of Defence provided in December 2014 from the inquiry in the 44th Parliament. Does the department wish to amend this submission?
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
Okay. I invite the department to make a brief opening statement should you wish to do so, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Senator, noting that we have started a bit late, I think we'll go straight to the proceedings.
Okay, sure. I don't have any questions, so I'll throw to Senator Carr.
Can I ask the officers, you've just heard the evidence in regard to the ASC. Is that, when was the department made aware that the ASC would not be part of the Future Frigates program? Sorry, the Future Submarines program.
Senator, I'll get the appropriate officers to the table.
Thank you. This is a shocker. Thank you.
Senator, could I ask you to repeat the question,
Yes,
just so I understand the full context?
You've heard the evidence that has just been provided to the committee from the company. When was the department made aware that ASC would not be part of the Future Submarines program?
Well, I think I should state from the outset, Senator Brad McGregor-Sammut, Head of the Future Submarine Program. I should state from the outset that we've always stated that it has been important for the designer of the future submarine to be involved in fact, leading the build of the future submarine. There are very few international programs that we can cite, in fact, none that we can cite, where we see success coming from taking the design from a designer of the future submarine, of a submarine program, and providing that to a company independently to build it. Importantly, though, we always consider that the submarines would be built in Australia, and that will be the case here, that the submarines will be built in Australia by Australians, recognising that we do have, in fact, one submarine workforce at the moment, and that submarine workforce will have to be...
I appreciate the preamble. I'm wondering if you could get to the question. When did you find out that the ASC was not going to be involved in the Future Submarine program?
Well, I don't think it was in our contemplation that ASC would be necessarily involved in the future submarine program as we set out in the CEP process, is what I'm stating, Senator.
Yeah, this was all, you knew all along, is that right?
In terms of the nature of its involvement, that evolved as we understood that the designer of the future submarine would have to be involved in the build of the future submarine.
Mm-hmm. You knew from the point at which DCNS was awarded the contract that the ASC would not be involved in the project.
We always understood that there would be involvement from ASC in terms of making sure that the submarine workforce in Australia would continue to be nurtured and be available to support the build of the future submarine and ongoing sustainment of the Collins class.
Yeah, the Collins. Future Submarines, separate project, am I correct?
The future submarine program involves the build of the future submarine. The sustainment of the Collins involves ongoing sustainment of the class.
Thank you. I understand. So I'm clear about that. Rear Admiral, I'm just looking to find out when the department knew that ASC would not be involved in the future submarine program. And I think what you're telling me is you knew all along. From the point at which the DCNS was awarded the contract. Is that the evidence you're providing to this committee?
What I'm saying is it was always in our conception, Senator, that the designer of the future submarine would be leading the build of the future submarine, and we stated that, I think, in evidence to the Senate.
We've got that clear.
As we commenced the competitive evaluation process.
So you knew at that point that the ASC would not be involved in the future submarine project?
We didn't define the extent to which they would or will not be involved. What we're stating is that we knew at the point of commencing the CEP, and this goes to the very reason why we selected the participants as we did in the CEP, Senator. We selected Japan, we selected France, and we selected Germany. We were asked why we didn't select other nations, and that's because...
I haven't asked you that at all.
But I'm explaining why, Senator, it was important for us to understand that, and hence the evidence that we gave to the Senate in the past, that we had to select somebody who not only knew how to design submarines, but could translate that design into the successful build and commissioning of those submarines into service. So to that extent, we were always clear that the designer would be involved in the build of the future submarine. The extent to which ASC would or would not be involved in that process was not clearly known. And what we've
Sorry,
had to
can I just get that clear?
the extent to which ASC would be
not
involved
clearly
in
known.
was not fully defined, is perhaps a better way of putting that, Senator.
When was it fully defined, is the point I'm trying to get to.
Well, it's still not precisely defined in the
I
sense
thought it was very well defined by the previous witness. Very well defined. There could be no ambiguity about that. Are you suggesting to me there was some ambiguity in the evidence?
No, I'm not suggesting there was ambiguity in the evidence. There is the fact, though, that the workforce that is currently in ASC will have to be shared with GCNS Australia for the build of the future submarine as we continue the sustainment of the Collins class. So there are linkages in that regard that I don't want to go unobserved.
Yes. So when they're retrenched, they can go somewhere else.
It's not a case of being retrenched, Senator. We can't afford to retrench anybody in our workforce
Rear
that's
Admiral,
involved with
I'm trying to establish when the department understood that the ASC would not be involved in the future submarines project. And can you give me a date on which you understood that to be the case?
That's not our position.
We engage with ASC, with DCNS Australia, now with other industry members as we try and mobilise the workforce that's required to not only build the future submarine but sustain Collins. And as part of that process, we do see them being involved in the build in terms of being able to manage the workforce and help grow that workforce as we prepare for that process.
Rear Admiral, do you think the people of Adelaide were entitled to an announcement on this?
Well, Senator, I would state that we are still building the future submarines in Adelaide with an Australian workforce.
Yes, that might be the case.
It is, in fact, a large part of the workforce that is coming from ASC to do that. So submarines are being
coming
built
from
in Adelaide.
other Australian defence companies, I'm sure. But I'm putting to you that there may well have been an obligation by Defence to actually make a statement on this very important question. I would think that for many people, the information we have heard today would be significant news. It would be quite a shock to them.
Senator Rebecca Skinner, Deputy Secretary of Strategic Policy Intelligence. The Admiral is clear that the workforce is a very important part of the program going forward, and there's no suggestion that that workforce is not important, need to be sustained and need to be grown. So the workforce, as we prepare a range of workforce planning measures to make sure we've got and can grow a workforce to support the entire shipbuilding program, in that instance, ASC has a significant piece of that workforce, and I think the Admiral is trying to explain that workforce is an important part of our future, and there is they will be part of that program going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Skinner, for drawing the point. When did the government find out that the ASC would not be part of the future submarine program?
Well, I think as the Admiral has said, the workforce is part of the future.
The workforce is an entirely different question. When did the company find out that they weren't going to be part of the future submarine program? Let's try that question. When did ASC find out they weren't part of it? Today? Was it the first they heard about it? Was it today?
I'll let Admiral Samrat and General Manager Submarines answer that.
Have they been advised?
ASC is aware that its role will be the sustainment of the Collins class and supporting our transition to build for the future submarine, which will be led by DCNS Australia.
Thank you. Are you the senior officer, are you, Mr. Skinner?
Oh, we both the senior
Sorry?
officer. Mr.
Gillies. Has ASC been advised they will not be part of the future submarine program?
I think the Admiral just said yes, they were.
They were advised. What was the date of that advice?
They're aware. I think they've been aware for a fairly...
When was the department advised them?
I'd have to take that on notice.
Thank
Senator.
you. When was the government aware? The Australian government I'm talking about. Let's not, we're obviously having trouble communicating here. When was the Australian government made aware that ASC would not be part of the future submarine program?
Well, I don't agree with you. We're going to go back to exactly what we've already said.
Yeah.
From Stephen Johnson, General Manager, Submarines. You are taking a position that we are not sharing with you. From the beginning, prior to the CEP, there has always been an expectation that the build of the submarine would be led by the designer. There's a long-standing testimony and
Mr. Johnson,
many industry lessons.
I'm not disputing that.
I'm
What
not
I'm
done-
disputing
I'm not
is
done,
whether the
Senator.
ASC was going to be involved in the future submarine program. That, to me, is a revelation. I suspect the other members of this committee, it's a revelation.
I continue.
Perhaps you could correct me if I'm wrong, but that is not, this is news to this committee.
I continue. The work before us is not fully defined. There is a role for the workforce as a bare
It's a
minimum.
bit like saying there's a work for the Holden in the Australian industry. It's a nonsense argument.
Could I respectfully disagree with that, Senator? The only workforce, as you pointed out, and capability that we have with submarines is currently within ASC today. We certainly need that workforce going forward to be involved in the build of the future submarine. In fact, we need to grow that workforce to build the future submarine and also continue to sustain the Collins class. That is the nucleus and kernel of the submarine workforce in Australia. It is scarce, it contains very scarce skills, and it is important that we can actually use that entire workforce to deliver the submarine capability that we have. So I do respectfully disagree with your assertion that that is the same as there is a
We'll have
jobs
to
for a
disagree.
Holden workforce.
Thank you very much.
Chair, can I just clarify something for my own benefit? There's a follow-up. Forgive me, shipbuilding is not my strong suit. Can I just be very, very clear? What work does the ASC, or does ASC Submarines currently undertake? It's just Collins class?
That is the only submarine capability we have in Australia. It is purely dedicated to the sustainment of the Collins capability.
And how many workers are we talking about?
We're talking about the order of 900 workers in a workforce for ASC. So let me be clear, this would include the engineering and commercial teams and so forth that are around ASC. There are 900 in ASC in Adelaide, and we have about 350 in Western Australia,
Right.
all engaged in the sustainment of the Collins class submarine. So we do what's called full cycle dockings in Adelaide on the Collins class, and we do all of our other dockings and maintenance in Western Australia where the submarines are based.
And I should probably know this, but when does the Collins sustainment run until?
It's going to be run for a long time because we have said that we will need to extend the life of some of the Collins class to ensure that there is no capability gap as we introduce the future submarine into service. So we expect Collins sustainment to be carrying on well into the 2020s as we commence the build of the Collins class.
So what are we talking, 10 years, 15 years?
We will have sustainment activities extending into the 2030s for the Collins class
2030s?
to keep them at sea.
So we're talking about a workforce that's going to have work for the next 15 years. Is that
least.
And we will need an additional 1,000 or perhaps slightly more workers. And that workforce has to be managed together.
So, Senator, there's no contemplation that the ASC submarine workforce will actually reduce at all for the foreseeable future, because we need to sustain and maintain, and if anything, we've actually got to do extensions to the life of the Collins, and there is actually a considerable workload that ASC sustainment will continue. Now,
Right.
there isn't within ASC submarines a new workforce, extant workforce to build the next generation submarine.
So-
we have to grow that.
Well, I'm confused about what the fuss is about then. We have a workforce that's going to be sustained for the next 15 years, and yet we've got a new $50 billion investment that requires an additional workforce.
That's correct.
So perhaps we can clarify. things.
Yes, all right. Well,
When-
that sounds like a good outcome to me.
Where will the Collins be sustained?
Excellent outcome.
Where will the
It's gonna be
Collins
hard work.
submarines be sustained?
At this stage, the Collins-class submarine is sustained in Adelaide and in Western Australia. There are no plans to move any of the sustainment. We are looking at what options may best suit us into the future as we contemplate the need to build and continue to sustain the Collins class. But there have been no decisions made at this stage on changing the current arrangements, whereby, as I've just explained, full cycle dockings are conducted in Adelaide on the Collins class, and other dockings and maintenance activities are conducted in Western Australia.
Thank you, Admiral. So there's no decisions been made, but are you telling me there's no plans to move the sustainment?
We are studying the options that are before us to ensure that we manage the resources that we have within Australia, we grow them properly to continue sustainment of the Collins class whilst we embark upon the construction of the future submarine. And we've just spoken about the rather large increase in size of the workforce that is necessary to do that. We also need to contemplate the ability to grow the infrastructure in Adelaide to support the build of the future submarine, which will extend beyond the existing facilities that are there.
So the build for DCNS will be in Adelaide. On what facilities?
It will be in the Techport area, and it will take the addition of new facilities there to build a submarine, a future submarine that will be designed to meet our requirements.
So it won't be using the facilities that are currently used by Collins?
No, it won't be using precisely the facilities used by the Collins class now. Those facilities were designed and built some time ago in the early 80s for the build of a submarine designed in the 1980s. We need to build a shipyard now that has the capacity to efficiently and effectively build a different sort of submarine, one that's been designed quite differently to the Collins class, and one that can continue to build submarines on a rolling acquisition program.
So what will happen to those facilities that are currently used?
Well, at this stage, they continue to be used for FCDs until we make any decision that may be necessary to be made as to whether we keep Collins sustainment where it is or move it. Now, the issue is there are no plans to move that at the moment. Our workforce is centred in Adelaide. We need to keep the work going on the Collins
Admiral,
class.
are you suggesting to me that you can sustain Collins and build the new boats on the same location?
That's precisely the study that's in progress. What's the...
You're not seriously suggesting to this committee that that's your proposal?
We're going to have to build new facilities well and around the existing facilities, Senator. Okay, there has to be a new whole construction hall. There has to be facilities for the building of modules. There will be land-based test sites that are necessary and so forth that currently don't exist on the existing ASC site. These are new facilities that will have to be built that, as I said, match the design process and build process employed by DCNS and give us the ability to efficiently build submarines into the future.
When DCNS put in their plans, they had a number of options. As we've just been told, that was their advice to this committee.
I believe you're referring to the CEP, which had each participant provide information on building in their own yard, building entirely in Australia, and a hybrid approach of their recommendation.
So
Subsequently, of course, we have decided to build all submarines in Australia.
Thank you. So their proposal was at all times just to not involve the ASC?
No, as we've discussed before, I don't agree with that assessment. The work, this is complex work, and it is years in front of us. And as our best example, there is, of course, a role, at least within managing the only workforce we have today that's skilled in submarine repair.
I'm trying to get to the question of who's made the decision in regard to the role of the ASC in the future submarine program. Now, you're trying to go to the question of who's going to manage the workforce, which won't be the ASC's workforce, it'll be someone else's workforce. That's why I'm saying to you, this is semantics. It's someone else's workforce. Now, I don't see why ASC will manage someone else's workforce. Now, I just want to know, at what point was the decision made that ASC would not be involved in the build of the future submarines?
Senator, if I might, Mark Ablong.
Perhaps you can help me out of this
I
dilemma
will
here.
try. You might recall that the government commissioned a strategic review of ASC Proprietary Limited in 2013, and for the next couple of years that strategic review continued. The government made announcements in October of 2016 about the future of ASC that resulted in the structural separation of the company into three elements. The first of those elements was the creation...
16, right?
Yes, it was the 11th of October 2016. The two ministers, Minister Pyne and Minister Cormann, I believe, announced that they would be structurally separating ASC into three companies. Those three companies are the Infrastructure Company, Australian Naval Infrastructure Proprietary Limited, the Collins Sustainment Company, that would be focused on delivering the sustainment of the Collins until such time as we withdraw the Collins from service, and ASC Shipbuilding, which was given the role of ensuring the finalisation of the Air Warfare Destroyer project. Those announcements did not suggest that ASC would be involved in any of the future submarine activities.
Thank you. So at that point it was no?
At that point it was known.
Known by government?
And the strategic review canvassed the options associated with ASC's future involvement.
So it was known by government at least at that date in October 16?
And the period leading up to that, where they were taking it through the National Security Committee of Cabinet.
So you'll be able to draw my attention to where it was stated that the ASC was not being involved in the future submarine program?
I think it's a statement by omission. It said
Well, it might
this
be,
is what
but
ASC is
show
to
me
do.
where I can find that statement by omission, implication, where anywhere where...
So the ministerial announcement on the 11th of October said this is what the future elements of ASC will be doing.
And we should have been quick enough to point out, to understand that what that really meant.
Indeed. They were the three tasks that ASC Proprietary Limited and its constituent elements, or the three elements that it was being split into, were to be involved in.
Do you think anyone in Adelaide understood it? Oh, well, that's good. I'm sure we'll look to that. So presumably the government's made a decision at that point?
Yes, it made a decision about what the future roles of ASC would be, which is Collins Sustainment, the finalisation of the Air Warfare Destroyer and the Infrastructure Company.
And that would have gone to Cabinet, that statement?
Yes,
What was the date at which it went to Cabinet?
I'll have to take that on notice, Senator.
Because that clearly is a decision point.
Yes.
Sorry, through you, Chair, I'm still bewildered. Has anybody at ASC lost their jobs?
There have been redundancies in ASC over time as they've finished the work associated with the Air Warfare Destroyer.
On the shipbuilding
side,
Okay,
not
but not as a
the-
result of these changes.
No, on the submarine side, as the Admiral has said, we need to significantly expand the Australian workforce in submarines, and we need to do that over a number of years. We also need to retain the workforce that has been doing a wonderful job on the sustainment of the Collins-class submarines. Their performance in recent years has been very good, and so we need to maintain and nurture that workforce. We also need to grow a separate but new workforce in there, and ASC has a role in that transition. And because we need to work very closely with the growth of the new submarine build to make sure that we're not having an adverse effect on the sustainment of the Collins-class submarine sustainment. And that's the balance between the relationship between ASC and DCNS.
Okay, thank you.
But we need a new workforce to grow the next generation submarine.
Thank you. Can I perhaps turn to some other areas? We've only got a limited time today, so if I share some others. The Naval Shipbuilding Plan announced on the 16th of May. Was the Industry Department involved in the preparation of that?
The Department of Industry was a participant in the development process, yes.
I presume they were co-opted to the National Security Committee on that matter?
I would have to take it on notice exactly who the co-optees were for the decision set, but officials from the department were certainly involved in discussions at a departmental level.
So in that plan, we have sustainment in New South Wales, in Queensland, Northern Territory, Western Australia, South Australia, but there's nothing in Victoria. Why is that?
We don't sustain any of the Navy's fleet in Victoria.
And is there a decision been taken to that effect?
The long accretion of decisions about where the fleet is based and how it will be sustained.
So that's a formal decision of government not to have any work done in Victoria?
The decision by government as to the construction of the future naval fleet, which the government announced in early 2016 to focus on Adelaide for the major surface combatants and the submarines, and Western Australia for the minor naval vessels, effectively ruled out construction activities in any other location.
Am I right in saying that in regard to the defence industry policy statement, the concept of local content doesn't appear?
In the defence industry policy statement?
No, in the defence industry policy statement, yes, of 2016.
You might want to repeat the question, Senator.
Does the words local content appear?
Local content?
I see industry policy statement.
I don't believe the specific phrase local content is in there, but it certainly talks about the maximisation of Australian industry involvement in defence.
Is that simply because you have different language than might be used in other parts of industry policy? Just don't use that term?
Local
Is that
content.
the reason?
No, I think we were, in developing the defence industry policy statement, we were being very clear that what we were seeking to do was to maximise Australian industry involvement across the range of defence activities.
What have you developed a set of sovereign capabilities yet?
That work is still underway, Senator.
When do you think that work will be concluded?
Senator, I'm the co-chair of the Centre for Defence Industry Capability. We're actually having a meeting tomorrow where that advisory group will be working on that advice for government, but it has to go from the advisory board into defence and then from defence into government. But we are clarifying and defining those roles. The plan was to have that done by the second half of this year.
So do you have any sense of the $90 billion that's tied up with the plan about what will be completed in Australia?
It is way too early to say, Senator. I mean, it will be determined as a consequence of the ongoing work on the C5000 and the C1180 projects, which are currently going through tendering processes. And then, as is the case in the Future Submarine project, the work between the successful tenderer and the Commonwealth to identify where Australian industry can be maximised and local industries involved in the construction activities.
So, in regard to the development of the sovereign capabilities, what is the level of engagement with Australian industry about those decisions? How will you determine those?
First off, it's the Centre for Defence Industry Capability, which is made up of a board, an advisory board co-chaired by Paul Johnson, a number of other representatives from defence industry, SMEs, Australian Industry Representative, Australian Defence Industry Representative groups. So that forum is working a policy on, working some advice on how do you define what a sovereign industry capability is? How would that process of looking at what are the characteristics that form those, and then advice would then be passed to Defence. Defence would then pass that to government.
On page 86 of the plan, there's talk here of the Centre for Defence Industry Capability will provide specialist business innovation advisors to guide and mentor business in defence-specific business improvement and so on and so forth. Are you familiar with that section of the...
And they're doing a fantastic job of doing that on a day-by-day basis.
It also talks about standardisation of engagement with and development of Australian industry. Are you familiar with that concept in that?
Yes, I am, Senator.
So can you tell me how that's going to work, particularly given the difference in approach in the different platforms that you're seeking to procure through this plan?
Why would...
Well, you've got
I don't
submarines,
understand
frigates,
the-
patrol boats. I mean, are you going to have a standardised approach to contracts or to supply chain management? How is it actually, what's the standardised approach that you're speaking of there?
So the task is through the contractual structures that we have, we maximise the Australian industry content. We go through the design phase. We look exactly what the Admiral and the previous presenter from DCNS stated, is that we go through a process of design and then trying to work out where it is sensible against cost, capability, safety trade-offs, where it's sensible to maximise that Australian industry. And you can't do that until you've actually gone through the design phase.
But you can have a standardised approach.
We are looking at that standardised policy process. We're looking at
So it's a policy
standardised
process.
Yep,
That's what I'm trying to get to.
Yeah, it's a policy process,
So in regard to DCNS, are you going to require them to, DCNS, to work with the Centre for Defence Industry Capability?
yes, Senator, they already are.
And Senator, a lot of this standardisation work is about having standard templates, standard ways of approaching the market, standard ways of developing an Australian industry capability plan, so that industry isn't in any doubt as to where the defence requirement is coming from or how it will be managed.
And as we've already stated in previous evidence, we have run industry roadshows for the submarine program, for the OPV program, for the frigate program, but also for the Land 400 program and a range of other programs. I would say my observation from my professional experience is that we've had more industry engagement in the last probably 18 months to 2 years than we have probably had in a number of previous years. So I think we have to acknowledge the good work that has actually been done to actually engage better with industry and the establishment of the Centre for Defence Industry Capability to provide that, as you stated before, that professional support, that business development support. And we're also working with a number of companies that traditionally have not engaged in the defence sector and that are moving into the defence sector, and we need to make sure that we support them in that transition so that they can engage with us. And we also need to adapt our strategies and our contracting methodology for those newer entrants into the market.
Okay, can I turn then to the Future Frigate program? How will the successful tenderer, I mean, what's there, 3 that have been shortlisted?
Yeah, 3 tenderers, Senator, yes.
You've asked the 3 of them to refine their designs. Are they required to find an Australian partner? Is that part of the refinement process?
Senator, they're working with a number of Australian companies and they have been engaging with a number of Australian companies to provide Australian industry content. That's a part of the work that they've been doing, and that's why we've been doing the roadshows.
So how have they been asked to refine their designs?
Senator, I'll have to pass to Admiral Mead because he's looking at the capability side, and there is a limited restriction of number of changes in the design because
there's a cost involved with each one of those changes, isn't there?
Senator, there is, but the issue we have is the timeframes of 2018 for the OPVs, 2020 for the frigates, means that we have to limit the design changes to ensure that we meet those timeframes. And I have had both Senator Xenophon and yourself very strongly questioning us on our commitment to those times. And if we
we'll
don't...
continue to question you.
And Senator, I respect that as your role,
Yeah.
but the issue we have is that we also have to bound design change because design change has an adverse effect on schedule and commencement. But those...
And cost.
And cost, absolutely, Senator.
Keep coming back to that. Right?
Yep. Senator Admiral Mead.
Thank you.
Good evening, Senator. Rear Admiral Jonathan Mead. I'm the Head of Navy Capability. The priority with the Future Frigate is to commence construction in 2020, and that drives all the work that we do. And yes, there are design changes in the Future Frigate, but the difference in the Future Frigate and previous constructions that we have undertaken is that we have absolutely given a commitment to minimise the design changes for the Future Frigate in order to de-risk the schedule, also to de-risk the capability, and it was part of the RAND report that the department commissioned, that you wanted to have the designer and the builder working together with the design changes, but you actually want to minimise those design changes.
So I'm interested to know, in terms of the tendering process, how will you meet the objectives, which of course are outlined in the shipbuilding plan, around sustaining Australian industry, shipbuilding industry, transfer of skills, and building of sovereign capabilities, and the development of a competitive Australian industry? How are you going to do that?
Senator, that's currently the part of the request for proposal, request for tenders that is out there with the companies. We are asking them how they intend to meet those requirements to develop the naval shipbuilding enterprise that the Naval Shipbuilding Plan talks about, how they intend to maximise Australian industry involvement, and ultimately they will need to develop an Australian industry capability plan that gives us their views as to how they are going to achieve exactly what you've just said. And part of the evaluation process will be evaluating those bids as they come in to determine whether they meet the intent of the Naval Shipbuilding Plan, the RAND principles that Admiral Mead has talked about, and the ability to sustain an Australian industrial base associated with naval shipbuilding.
Can I turn then to the framework agreement between the Australian Government and the French Republic regarding the submarine program? There's a series of subcommittees required under Article 4 to assist the steering committee in performance responsibilities under the agreement. Does that actually happen?
Yes.
I'm sure you're delighted to be back, Admiral.
As always, Senator.
So has that actually happened yet?
Subcommittees have started to form, and the most important ones are around security requirements for the future submarine program, and appropriate working groups have been established for that.
And are there representatives of the workforce engaged with that? On these subcommittees?
Are there representatives of...
Of future workforce involved?
This is about security for the future...
There's a number of subcommittees, it's not just all security.
Sure. I'm sorry, I thought you were asking me about the security working group.
No. But there are a number of committees, didn't you not say?
Well, there's several actual security committees that involve looking at various aspects of security.
You're talking about within the framework of the government agreement between France and Australia.
Yes.
There is a steering committee and a number of committees underneath that will pursue various things at particular points in the program. Some of those will be more relevant than others. At the moment, the one that has been most relevant to us is the establishment of the Security Committee.
I see.
And the arrangements underneath that, which are off, and there are appropriate representatives from across the security sector.
Yeah, but I'm not seeking to have...
But so, for example, the Science Committee, we've not yet really got that one going because that is
supply chain?
not as important to us in the...
All of those will come with time,
in time,
and then we will bring the appropriate workforce representatives to the table when they're needed as part of that process, as they're needed.
But there will be an engagement with workforce representatives through this process. Is that understood in the terms of the agreement? Is that...
Senator, I think it's necessary to say that the terms of the treaty allow us to establish working groups and subcommittees as required to progress the program. If it becomes necessary to talk to France in detail about particular issues that involve, for example, the supply chain or workforce matters, we have the option to do that. At this stage, though, I don't foresee an immediate need to be talking about workforce in Australia when that is primarily an Australian issue, to ensure that we have our workforce established here for the build of the future submarine in the very first instance.
And if I might just pursue a question in regard to technology transfer, what process is being undertaken through that treaty arrangement to secure those arrangements?
The necessary agreement from the French government to ensure that we can have the transfer of technology that we will identify as necessary to feed into Australian industry, so that we have the sovereign capacity to build and then sustain the submarines throughout their life.
Okay, so does that go to the question of information sharing around particularly intellectual property?
Indeed. Transfer of technology involves a number of things, principally the transfer of technical data, and that's linked to intellectual property, as you're aware. It involves the training of personnel involved in the use of that information so that it can be put to best use, and mentoring where necessary to ensure that the skills are grown in Australia to participate meaningfully in the program.
And in terms of new information that's developed, new IP, who will own that?
So any information that is developed, new information that's developed, as is stated in the treaty and elsewhere in our arrangements with DCNS, becomes foreground IP, which vests in the Commonwealth upon its creation, ownership of which vests with the Commonwealth upon its creation.
Mm-hmm. And with regard to project management, what arrangements do you envisage will be in place to secure the necessary skills in Australia for project management?
Well, they're project management skills that we are currently building up now in terms of our engagement with Australian industry, and also our engagement with DCS in terms of understanding the specifics of the submarine design process that they apply. An important part of this in selecting DCNS is to ensure that we don't introduce changes to their design process. It's the experience and skills they have in that design process that we want to make sure is transferred to Australia, and in particularly into a company like DCNS Australia, such that we can be in a position where they, the management of the program takes place from Australia.
Article 13 talks about the principles that guide Australian industry's involvement in the submarine project. That's correct, isn't it?
I don't have the treaty before me, Senator, so I have to rely on your,
I hope my notes are
your
correct.
advice there.
What I'm interested to know is what process will do you envisage being pursued in terms of our reporting to secure the transfer of knowledge to supply chain participants?
I think as we were discussing a little bit earlier, in fact, Mr. Brent Clark was explaining, we are in the process now of looking at the systems on board the submarine. We're also looking at the range of activities that Australian industry will be involved in the future submarine program. If we think about, of course, the activities we're talking about in the earliest instance, our ability to construct the submarine yard in Australia, to do its detailed design in Australia. We're talking about the ability to run land-based test sites. We're talking about the ability to build the submarine here. On those activities alone, there's the transfer of information into Australia, such as design inputs into those facilities, the training of personnel that will be necessary to start building the submarine. We were speaking earlier about having to expand our Australian workforce to do that. Indeed, one of the earliest parts of the workforce we have to develop will be the structural workforce. In other words, the workforce that will be building the whole sections of the submarine in Australia. And as an example there, we need to ensure that we have our whole construction hall completed in time to have our workers trained in the use of the tools and qualified for that. If we look at systems on the boat, we're looking very carefully at each system to make sure we understand what's necessary to build systems that need to be built here, but in particular to be able to maintain them throughout their life. One of the key lessons of the Collins program was, regardless of the level of Australian industry involvement we have, we did not end that program with the sovereign sustainment capability. In other words, with enduring industrial capability in Australia to look after the boats through time. It's only at this point in the boat's life, through the improvements and transformations that ASC have been largely involved in, that we've developed that capability. So we're working on the mechanisms now to make sure the transfer of that information and technology into Australian industry occurs, so we have those outcomes.
Yeah. Thank you very much. So you're satisfied the agreement will allow you to do all of that, or do you actually need a further instrument?
Sorry, could you repeat the first part of that question?
Are you satisfied that the agreement will allow you to do all of those measures, or do you think you need further
No.
agreements to secure that transfer?
Now, we're happy that the agreements in place allow us to implement the detailed planning now that takes place under our contracts with DCNS as we develop the plans for the implementation of those processes.
So you don't think you need anything further?
Not in terms of instruments that you refer to. So the treaty covers those requirements as we have it. We will explore if necessary. The treaty allows us to put in place other implementing arrangements and so forth as may be necessary, but at this stage we are not seeing any impediments in terms of enabling the planning that's underway at the moment to be implemented as we expect.
So, Senator, just a comment, and I think it's a really important one that the Admiral made here, is that we're not just looking at a short-term Australian industry component, we're looking at how do you create a sovereign industry to sustain. And I think we've learnt the lessons from Collins, we've learnt the lessons in the past, and this is about how we make sure that those companies that we select have got longevity in life, that they've got the skills, they've got the technology, and they can be involved not just in the build, but in the long-term sustainment, which is actually where the bulk of the money is.
That's exactly what I appreciate that, and I strongly support that. Can I ask you about R&D in terms of the capacity there? Do you think there's a capacity there to develop new capabilities in Australia in this area?
There's a capacity for us to, I think, capitalise on some of the capacities that we have, and if we choose to work further with France on particular research and development activities that would further submarine capability between our countries.
So do you envisage that you'll be obliged to undertake any further work with Australian research agencies on this issue?
Senator, I know that the Next Generation Technologies Funds, the Defence Science and Technology Group are all very much focused on how they can support the next generation submarine and to work on those. But and that's in niche areas of capability and research. But we are now in the rolling wave build of submarines out the next 50 years plus. We need to make sure that we're participating in the R&D process as well.
All right, and look, I think I might have to put a few of these on notice because we've run out of time. But look, there's just one matter I do need to clarify in regard to the previous exchange we had on regard to the role of the ASC. And the statement, I want to be clear about the statement that was made in October, if I might, Mr. Avalon. I just want to clarify that in terms of the structural separation of the company, the ASC we're talking about now,
yes.
It's the third division you spoke of was to deal with shipbuilding, but was it specifically for air welfare defence work?
As I believe, Senator, working from memory, the ministerial announcement said that the focus of ASC shipbuilding would be on the finalisation of the air warfare destroyer project.
But no other?
It did not mention any other work.
So was it understood then in October last year that the ASC would, apart from the sustainment work, it would not be involved in any other work other than the air warfare destroyer work?
Senator, that's not correct. I know that ASC is tendering currently and partnering with two of the designers on the OPV.
Well, I'm pleased to hear that, but I'm just...
Senator, part of this is these are in the middle of tenders.
No, I'm not asking you to comment on their capacity because we've been the canoe route before, right? I'm not going down there. I'm asking you, in terms of that evidence, Senator, because I thought you specifically referred to the air warfare destroyers. I just didn't want it to be understood.
It didn't say what would happen when the air warfare destroyer was finalised.
Yes.
It didn't say, and then something will happen. Either they will be folded up or they will move into other business.
Yes, right. But they're not precluded from tendering from other work?
No, correct.
Because the implication would be once that's done, if it's not stated otherwise.
Yes.
But if the point you're making is that if they're tendering for other work, they anticipate...
I understand that they are continuing to tender on the OPV program.
Thank you very much.
As partners, JV partners with other
I thank
tenderers.
my colleagues for their indulgence. I've been asking a few questions here, so...
Senator, do you have any further
No, I'm all
questions?
fine, thank you.
Senator Xenophon?
I just want to go to Senate estimates on the 18th of October, where Senator Gallagher asked some questions of Mr Wiley, head of ASC, the interim chair, CEO of ASC. He said, what is ASC's understanding of the role and responsibilities of these three new companies? And he talked about, there was further some questions that I asked. Mr Wiley said the three companies are focused firstly on shipbuilding and secondly on submarine sustainment. I would add that inside that sustainment arm, at the moment we are doing negotiations on future submarine elements. That is contained with that element. So back in October, I got there seemed to be an inference there that the ASC was still in the game to be involved in the future submarine contract.
As it relates to sustainment activities for Collins-class submarines?
No. Let me repeat that. I'm sorry. The three companies are focused firstly on shipbuilding and secondly on submarine sustainment. I would add that inside that sustainment arm, at the moment we are doing negotiations on future submarine elements. Are you saying that's only for sustainment?
For sustainment, correct.
So nothing on
Senator,
building.
I might add, just to clarify, that we said that there would be involvement of ASC in terms of making sure that the workforce was managed in the transition of work that would manage both Collins sustainment and the future submarine. There is a need to make sure that we look at supply chains that ASC currently use. We need ASC's input into infrastructure requirements to make sure that the build of the future submarine yard can be managed alongside the sustainment of the Collins and so forth. That was my understanding of Mr Wiley's comments in that regard.
I need to jump to questions on ICCPM. Mr Gillis, if I can ask you some questions in respect of that.
Senator, yes.
You may have seen the articles in both the Daily Telegraph and Canberra Times recently on on CASG's or Defence's contracts with ICCPM. You familiar with those
Yes,
articles?
I was.
Okay. What specialty services have you contracted them for, and why is this service not available in Defence?
Senator, I can't answer that because I haven't been involved in those.
Who has been?
I'd have to refer to... Senator, I manage a very large organisation, and in that organisation, to expect me to be managing each and every one of these, especially because I specifically recused myself from my engagement. So I'll pass over to the Admiral who was involved with some of those contracts.
So the specific services, and there is a question on notice that we'll also be answering this on, Senator. But to answer your question today, we've engaged personnel from ICCPM to provide a number of services, including strategic advice, program management services, strategic industry advice, industry and supply chain management, and project services.
Right. So 5 contracts worth $5.5 million.
I'm not exactly sure that's the total there, Senator. There are 4 contracts for 6 personnel engaged with the Future Submarine Program for contracts totalling $4.9 million. I believe there are additional ICCPM people utilised elsewhere in CASG that I am not part of that. I was not part of that contracting process.
So I presume they're providing specialist services. Is that right?
Elsewhere in CASG, I would say
Right.
that, yes.
And therefore you're aware of who they were before you contracted ICCPM Solutions.
I was aware of
So
who
in terms
they
of,
were.
I'll withdraw that. I just want to ask this question. Why were these contracts tendered through the Border Force Services Panel and why not the Defence Services Panel?
It's common practice that government agencies establish standing offer panels and make them available for other departments to use. So we followed a standard process there whereby we could use an existing standing offer panel for the provision of services. This is not unique. It happens in a number of occasions.
So my office has been informed that this was done because ICCPM Solutions was not on the Defence Services Panel and that Defence essentially wanted ICCPM Solutions. Is that your understanding?
No, we wanted the best services that we could provide in terms of the services that we were after. And there was a panel that offered those services and we used that panel.
So, one of the issues that's been put to me is that the husband of the director of ICCPM Solution works inside CASG, perhaps as a subcontractor, the very organisation that awarded ICCPM Solutions the contract. Is that correct or not?
I'm not aware of that. I think that's something we'd have to direct to ICCPM.
Right.
We followed a standard process here whereby we went to a panel that listed ICCPM. They had the capability that we need. Being on the panel, they'd already been through a competitive process to be establishing themselves as capable of offering those services, and they're the services that we sought.
Look, I raised it. I'm not going to name the people involved because I just worry about the process involved, because a similar situation existed in relation to this husband and wife pair in Air Services Australia, the One Sky issue, which has been the subject of a very critical ANAO report. So I just don't want to report. I don't want a repeat of those concerns.
Senator, I can give you an undertaking that yes, a gentleman does work here, but let's not get into the people and the individuals. But he had no involvement whatsoever to any of these things.
Okay, it's just that the ANAO report's been something looked at by another committee, and I just don't want us to repeat. You're saying that the issues raised by the ANAO report for One Sky could not possibly be repeated here.
Absolutely, Senator. We've kept...
But you can understand the basis for why I asked it.
Understand, Senator. Absolutely understand. And I know specifically that he was not involved in any of these processes or tenders or any of those activities.
Right. So there'd be no issue, I mean, for the Auditor-General to look at these matters so that we know that there's not a repeat.
Senator, I actually said on record, I welcome any external involvement.
Okay. Chair, I have many questions I noticed about other matters, and many questions. I think I'm going to... yeah.
Yes, look, I have just been looking at a Financial Review article of the 11th of October 2016, which there were comments on the restructuring of ASC, and I note that Mr Bruce Carter, the ASC chairman at the time, said that the board had been working closely with the government on the issue and had effectively been operating separate submarine and shipbuilding businesses for the last 2 years. And he said that the ASC welcomed the announcement, saying that it positions the company to support Australia's future shipbuilding and submarine capability. So
perfectly logical statement for him to make.
So when the board and management of ASC believe that the restructuring is going to lead to supporting Australia's submarine capability,
and ASC will have an enduring, long-term support of our Australian submarine capability. And one of the things which is most important to our Australian submarine capability is the sustainment and the life extension of the Collins-class submarine. That's a perfectly valid statement for him to make.
But the inference is future
Senator,
submarine work.
you make the inference.
I am certainly doing that.
We regard submarine capability as Collins and the future submarine, and the Collins class is in fact the mainstay of our capability and will remain so into the 2030s.
I guess we'll have to talk to him and see.
Chair, can I just... Through you... Oh, Chair, do you have more quick?
yes.
Oh, yeah. I just want to just go back and if this has to be taken notice, so be it on the ICCPM solutions issue. When the contracts were tendered through the Border Force Services Panel, the contracts were tendered through the Border Force Services Panel rather than the Defence Services Panel. Can you tell me how unusual is that to go to Border Force? Is it common?
We use finance panels for the acquisition of certain skills and services. We use other government panels for that.
And look, on notice, can you tell me why is it that something goes to one panel rather than another panel?
It depends upon the specific skills or requirements that you have. It may be that the defence panel associated with particular sets of skills had lapsed and was going through the process.
So on notice, can you tell me why was it that we chose this particular panel rather than the Defence Services Panel?
Sure. We can do that, Senator.
I'll put some questions on notice. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And that concludes today's hearing. I thank all witnesses for their time. Responses to questions on notice taken today are due on Friday the 14th of July. I declare the hearing closed.
Thank you, Chair.